Starfish? Mussel? Kelp. A trip to the beach is an adventure in discovery. Now look out at the ocean's surface. You can see all the way to the horizon. Beneath this great watery surface is another world of animal and plant life, of chemicals and minerals, and an ocean floor full of mysteries, an ocean floor that has really never been explored. Oceanography is the study of the oceans, the tides and currents, the content of the waters, the plant and animal life, the ocean floor, the seashore, and the air above the oceans. With so much to study, the ocean scientists, or oceanographers, must specialize in one phase of it. What part of oceanography would you like to study? You could study meteorology, the weather of the oceans. By studying the weather that develops over our oceans, we can learn more about our own weather, no matter where we happen to live. You might study the physics of the oceans, what makes the waves, the currents, and what causes the tides. You might want to study the chemistry of the oceans and find out about the minerals, such as salt, magnesium, and even gold found here. You might study biology, which is all about the plant and animal life that is found in the oceans. You might want to study the geology of the oceans and learn about the seashore, the ocean bottom, and the islands. By studying the rocks along the shores, the mud, sand, and fossils of their floors, geologists are now finding surprising answers to questions about how our Earth was formed. For example, how is an island formed? An island is really a part of the ocean floor, except that it's high enough to protrude above the water. These particular islands are the tops of underwater mountains. We've never seen much of the ocean floor, but the oceanographers have learned about it by measuring ocean depths all over the world and sampling the bottom. They can also study what the oceans have been like for thousands of years in the past. They take what is called a core sample by driving a long, hollow tube into the silt on the bottom. The tube fills with silt. And when they bring the tube to the surface, it contains a sample of the ocean bottom, layer by layer, just as it was laid down during thousands of years. Think what you can learn about recent Earth history from these core samples. Ocean scientists can now draw maps of the land under the ocean just as we draw maps of dry land. They can tell us whether it is covered with silt or sand, or whether it's rocky. A picture of the ocean bottom without the water would look something like this. Around most of the continents, there is a continental shelf, a shallow area about 400 or 500 feet deep. Can you see that the continents are actually larger than the area that appears above water? The deep parts of the ocean, as much as 6 or 7 miles deep in some places, are covered with ridges and valleys and undersea mountain ranges. In future years, explorers of the ocean bottom will use these maps just as explorers used early maps to explore the land. How would you like to explore the ocean floor in an underwater vehicle like this? This one is designed to go to a depth of several thousand feet. This will allow scientists to explore much of the ocean floor. Pressure in the ocean increases with depth. Below a certain depth, the hull of this vehicle might be crushed by the weight of the surrounding water. At a depth of 6,000 feet, the water would exert a pressure of 1 ton per square inch on the hull of this vehicle. The depth at which men can work safely without special protection is also limited by pressure. By learning more about the effects of pressure, scientists will make it possible to work safely at greater and greater depths. Do you know what makes an ocean wave? Most waves are caused by winds blowing over the ocean's surface. But waves have a great effect not only on ships, but on the coastal land. By building machines that simulate wave action, ocean scientists study the effects of waves. Do you know what an ocean current is? Masses of ocean water are constantly moving, and generally they move in the same paths. These are called ocean currents, and the temperature of these moving masses of water will vary according to where they come from. A cold current, called the California current, coming from the North Arctic region and running down our Pacific coast, has a cooling effect on the nearby land. An ocean current coming from tropical ocean areas will be quite warm and will warm the air and land nearby. The Gulf Stream starts in the tropics and runs along Florida and part of our Atlantic coast. It also crosses the Atlantic and has a warming effect on the entire coast of Europe. By thus distributing the temperature of the cold regions and the warm regions of our Earth, the oceans are very important in making certain parts of the world more comfortable for people to live in. What if some of these currents changed? It would make the climate quite different for us, wouldn't it? Generally, our climate is affected by the oceans in three ways. One way is the warming effect or the cooling effect of ocean currents on nearby land, which we've just described. A second way is in the rainfall that the oceans create for us. As masses of air pass over the oceans, they pick up moisture from the surface. When these moist air masses pass over land, they are pushed up into higher, colder air by mountains or other irregularities. The cooling causes the moisture to condense into clouds. It eventually falls on the land as rain. Have you ever seen a hurricane? A third way in which the oceans affect our weather is the tropical storms, which are called hurricanes in the Atlantic, and typhoons when they occur in the Pacific. When they hit land, they often cause considerable damage. Irregularities in the land eventually break up the storm, but they have a considerable effect on our weather. If you were a meteorologist, you would study the weather of the ocean areas so that you would be better able to predict the weather on land. Now, what about the chemical composition of the oceans? Water is basically made up of two chemical elements, hydrogen and oxygen. However, seawater contains large amounts of valuable minerals in solution, about 3.5 pounds for every 100 pounds of water. They have been brought to the ocean through the rainfall that we've just described. When it falls on land, it dissolves these minerals and washes them out of the land down into the ocean. These minerals are left in the ocean when pure water is picked up in the air masses that pass over it. So a greater concentration of minerals is building up in the oceans. In other words, the ocean is getting saltier all the time. If you take a dish of seawater and let it evaporate in the sun, you will find that sodium chloride or salt crystals are left behind. So we know that much of the mineral content is salt. In some parts of the world, large amounts of salt are taken from the ocean for commercial use. But sometimes we need the water more than we need the salt. This is a desalting plant that separates salt from water. In this process, we are seeking the fresh water, not the salt. Men can't live without fresh water, and as we find our normal supplies becoming exhausted, we realize that desalted water may eventually become the most important product we take from the sea. But the ocean chemist is faced with even more urgent problems. There is now evidence to show that we are polluting the water of the ocean in ways which may make a serious problem for people in the future. Pollution from our cities, pollution from industrial plants on the ocean shore, oil spilled into our oceans from tankers or from underwater oil wells, even the pollution which we put in the air. This eventually comes down somewhere, and much of it into our ocean. These are the pollution problems that must be solved. The ocean chemist is leading the way in the solution of these and other problems. The first forms of life started here in the oceans. These life forms, both plant and animal, are mostly different from those we find on land. However, they depend on the same basic source of energy, the sun. Let's look at some of these life forms. In tropical waters, you will find fish, shellfish, corals, and sponges of many different sizes and shapes. Staghorn coral, brain coral, a blue-headed wrasse, damselfish, porcupine fish, sea fans, sea anemone, plume worm, moon jellyfish, sea urchin, the colder regions of the ocean are also full of life, but none of it could exist without plankton. Plankton is where the food chain starts. Plankton is made up of tiny forms of animal and plant life which float freely in countless numbers in the upper layers of water. There are untold billions of them in our oceans. The sun, combined with chemical nutrients in the water, nourishes the plant forms which are called phytoplankton. These provide food for the animal forms, or zooplankton. Larger animals feed on these, and so it goes throughout the oceans, each larger animal feeding on the smaller ones. All of these creatures must sometime die and sink to the ocean floor. Here they decompose and eventually turn into chemical nutrients, which will finally be brought to the upper layers of the ocean by upwelling currents. At the surface, they will nourish the phytoplankton, and the food chain will start all over again. Why is it important for us to study the biology of the ocean? Because the oceans offer a much greater potential food supply than we can presently produce on land. Most individual animals of the sea produce large numbers of young. For instance, one female shrimp lays 50,000 eggs. In the open ocean, most of the young are eaten by larger animals. If we could successfully isolate these young from the animals that prey on them, couldn't we raise great numbers of shrimp very easily? This is an experimental shrimp farm. In these protected ponds, shrimp are being raised from eggs to find out if we can successfully farm these ocean dwellers. Commercial fishing fleets are harvesting the vast animal populations of the sea today. But farming or controlled raising of these populations holds great promise for the future, and the ocean biologists are showing us the way. Let's review what we've learned about the science of oceanography. What does the ocean meteorologist do? What are some of the minerals that the ocean chemist finds in large quantities? What are some things we include when we study the physics of the ocean? In what ways does the geologist help in the exploration of the ocean? How will the work of the ocean biologist help us in the future?